my name is John Suh, and I manage the Hyundai's Cradle office in Silicon Valley. And just a bit more about Cradle. It's a network of offices, actually. I manage the Silicon Valley office. We have Tel Aviv, Berlin, Beijing, and more recently Singapore is going to open up shortly. And we're the corporate venturing and open innovation centers or hubs, regional hubs for Hyundai Motor Group. And we're trying to help accelerate the introduction of new technologies, new business models to help the transformation of Hyundai Motor Group from where it is today, which, as you may know, is a largely automotive-centric group. We have the Genesis, Kia, and Hyundai brands, but there's another 45 or so companies within the conglomerate. But as the name suggests, it's primarily an automotive-centric group today. We're having about 70% of its revenue coming from its automotive businesses.
Right. And I know probably people were familiar that Genesis is part of it, but maybe people weren't familiar that Kia. Can you explain the Kia relationship?
Yeah, that was acquired. Korea had it had an economic crisis in '98 or so, and there was a lot of government initiated consolidation of businesses. And what happened was Kia Motor Corporation was consolidated with Hyundai Motor Company about '98 or so. And so what happens is it is a originally separate company. In the marketplace, it competes head to head with Hyundai, but there's a shared product development organization that's a shared resource. But design and manufacturing and sales are all separate for the most part. There's some sharing with manufacturing, but design and sales and operations are totally separate. And so they compete head to head. And then certainly in the design phase, it's very secret. They don't know each other. And so the engineering team, they try to homologate, if you will, the designs to as best they can across those two brands.
And do you serve Kia as well, or is it mostly Hyundai Motor?
It's across the board. So I'm supposed to be brand agnostic. So what's confusing sometimes is the name Hyundai. It's meant to signify the Hyundai Group, Hyundai Motor Group, but not just the Hyundai, the brand. But it's obviously very confusing. But I serve across all of the brands.
That's great. So clearly you have global teams with the offices around the world, and obviously Hyundai being headquartered in Asia. How is this situation, sort of talking about the here and now, changing the way you work and managing your teams? And have you found that, as a lot of people seem to have noted, that you're more efficient and productive? So I guess it's two parts. How has it changed sort of how you're managing your teams? But then, on the other side, as we get to the other side, how might it permanently change how you work and manage your teams? Love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think a lot of others, I'm guessing those that are doing, I guess what you might call knowledge work, it could have been, you don't just have to be face-to-face. Obviously, that kind of facilitates a lot of quick conversations, but it's just a lot of the work we could have been doing actually remotely anyway. So this is just, I suppose, made that more apparent, I suppose, rather than debating should we work remotely or not. It certainly has impacted, though, a lot of the face-to-face meetings, right? So when we're meeting with startups or with other potential partners, there's a lot of communication that is easier when you're face-to-face. And so now we're going to have to be a lot more, it takes more steps or more time to kind of get to a common understanding or shared understanding, especially with meeting people for the first time. But other than that, I think it's been more or less the same. I would say what's harder, though, is, I guess, it's easier when you're all together to make a decision. When you're distributed, there's a lot more kind of waiting and kind of pausing in between.
Right. And any thoughts on, how specific teams in specific cities or countries maybe have responded to the crisis and are working differently or working the same? I mean, we get a little myopic here in the US, but I'm just curious, as you've been talking with your teams around the world, how they're going about doing their jobs.
I think the good news has been, especially on the corporate venturing side in particular, the whole thing is shifted online. So you have conferences that are online, you have meetings like this, which are online. So that's the good news. I think everybody just did a whole shift,
right,
almost simultaneously. So that's been really, really helpful. Where it gets more difficult though is when you have to, we also have an innovation part. So when we're trying to demo some tech, we want to see it work in our own environment or our own sort of situation where we need that direct contact, then that's been delayed significantly in some cases where we can't do that until we can get people to be face-to-face inside a room together working on a tech demo or other sort of technology experiment.
That's great. And in regards to sort of, your role now in the Valley in particular, let's talk just, open innovation broadly, and let's start with maybe corporate venture capital. I know there was some sort of rash reactions from some companies when the crisis first hit and they shut down their corporate venture capital units, and then, and maybe if they weren't well run and just money sucked, then that's fine. But, talk to us a bit about, the best practices that you've learned, and then sort of what's the state of venture capital and corporate venture capital now in the Valley? Because you're sitting there right in the middle of the Valley. Are you still in, getting companies pitching you? Are you still actively funding companies? And just what's that feeling in the Valley right now for you? And then sort of the best practices of corporate venture capital that will allow you to keep moving on and after the crisis, instead of just cutting it all together.
So I think for us, we're still investing globally. So again, we have teams globally, and all of them are sourcing deals. All of them are, making proposals to our internal investment committee for their approval. And so we're still doing that. Other than, of course, I think the slowdown in terms of like the first meetings. I think overall, I would say that any corporate venturing activity that has been shut down would have been shut down eventually.
Right. I agree.
Right. And this is sort of convenient opportunity to say, well, right, revenues are down, so can't do this anymore. That's my guess, right?
Yeah. And the feeling in the Valley, I asked, we asked this of a couple panelists yesterday. I asked Raj Kapoor from Lyft last week just what the feeling in the Valley was in the Bay Area. What's the general feeling out there right now?
I think the general feeling is, honestly, it's for some investors, it's like, oh, we've seen this story before, right? And the story before was 2008, 2009, when there was the Great Recession, and before that we had the early recession of 2000s, right? And so I feel like it's like, certainly it's a unique situation from what's causing the slowdown, but I feel like for the investors who've been around for a while, it's not necessarily a new thing, right? It's just sort of another externality that is causing one to rethink how we fund our business model, customers, et cetera.
Right. And in the past, let's move to open innovation a little bit more broadly. And, the companies that you invest in and just the emerging technologies that you're scouting and looking at, and even maybe helping develop product, what were the best practices before this crisis, in terms of the things that you're working on actually turning it into either real products or features or even now services of the actual cars, right? Like, what was that process of getting something from the Valley that you incubated into a into a Hyundai or Kia car, and getting the people out, and whether it's sold, if that's where the final decisions were made, or maybe some of the decisions are made in the US. And then maybe will that change, are they looking to you more now for innovation? But I'd love to hear your best practices on actually getting product out.
Yeah. So best practices, I'm, fortunately we have been changing how we do open innovation for prior to now about a year plus or so. I would say actually a little bit more, maybe in 2019, we really started to change how we do this. And the big change was, it was to really involve other divisions. So we're part of the strategy technology division, which is kind of a more forward thinking part of the division, heavily, looking at strategy, as the name suggests. But then we also have product development organization. We have product planning and strategy. There's marketing. We have the regional centers. So I think what's happened since 2019 is that we have always understood that unless you get the other divisions involved, one of them can put a break to something. And one of the biggest changes has been product development and also product strategy. Those two divisions have really opened up, if you will, or even changed themselves structurally to be more able to take in new ideas, and in particular product strategy and planning. They've instituted their own sort of processes and means of intentionally reaching out, engaging us in terms of Cradle. We're looking for this. We know what you're doing. We know what you can do. We're looking for this. Can you let's work together to put together a theme on, digital retail, let's say, right? And so we work together. We put together workshops. We have face-to-face meetings between startups, innovators, and the product planning division, and try to make things happen more faster. And so that's been happening for over a year now. Of course, now we don't have those meetings, so we've been trying to do these virtually at this point. We still want to do them, and they still want to do them. And then even the startups, we're asking startups to apply, for these programs that we have. And as we're trying to do a virtual program right now. And so I'm really happy that we've done, and again, without the support of other divisions, it's really, really hard.
Right. And in
like
terms
us.
of actually, and in terms of managing that process internally, whether it's your office or the offices around the world, what's been your process in terms of, there's been a lot of people complain about death by POC, right? And proof of concepts. So how do you keep things moving? I mean, and do you think coming out of this, are you going to do less sort of blue sky, moonshot type of stuff, and that the mothership is really going to want you to focus on solving very specific types of problems via innovation? I'm just curious how that's going to evolve.
Yeah, I would say, I think given, and I would expect this too, by the way, given the slowdown in the automotive market, we're gonna probably want to do a little bit more. Either, I would say, things that are more mature, right? Things that are technically more mature, so that the time that we can introduce innovation to the marketplace is less, right? That's likely going to happen. That said, though, there is still within the company the ability to do blue sky things. It's not maybe as much as before, but it's not gone either, right?
Right. And this is a little bit in the weeds of sort of open innovation and managing your teams and product development. Do you use any like specific software tools in terms of, ideation and, sort of, innovation software? How do you actually manage your process internally?
We use email.
Spreadsheets and email.
and Zoom.
Zoom.
Gosh, right? Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Everybody listening, I don't, if you have Zoom fatigue, I don't know if that's a thing yet, but I'm sure it's going to be one day soon.
Right. No. So I'd like to alert David Kirkpatrick. I'm going to get to his question in just 1 second here. So be ready. And Josh, if we can get ready for his video and audio. It's sort of a macro level question from Peter Carr out here first, and then we'll get to David. What impact will the virus have on digital transformation of the automotive sector? We've talked a little bit about that. And can the traditional players survive? So you take that however you would like.
My number one thing that I would like to see for all OEMs, right, not just Hyundai, especially us, that we would accelerate this digital transformation to digital retail. And of course, the great example, of course, is Tesla. They've been doing it from day zero, right? They pioneered for years. They've been doing it for years now, and so we know what it looks like. And so I hope we could get there with this event, right? Because people can't go to the stores, or they don't want to, right? And that's probably the number one thing we as an automotive industry can do, to use this crisis to change how we do digital retail and sales. Yeah. And we did that one thing. Right. That would be massive. Right.
Yeah. I would like to go out to David, who I know has a question. His video, there he is, in beautiful upstate New York. So David, go right ahead.
Just the very moment you turned me on, my wife opened the door, but that's all right. Hey, John, great to have you, and thanks for being here and for doing all you do. I had a question about is it living experiences or life experiences? What does that mean? And is there any suggestion in that being part of the name of your group that Hyundai's thinking well beyond things that we would normally expect? And has that accelerated or changed at all in this moment when who knows what is going to happen about anything?
So yeah, living experiences it was a bit of it's an acronym that we kind of had to make it work. Cradle was what we decided to go. Living experiences is the best thing that we can do to think about. Basically, it means it's basically human experiences, human life, right? The things that people do to live, and in ordinary life, and it's just that mobility and cars were a part of people's lives, right? And then people's lives are just part of that experience when they're in a car or any kind of mobility for that matter. So it was trying to take a more human-centric approach to how we design our products and our services.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, how has it changed the way you work?
So it's one of the ways it's changed is thinking about that the point necessarily isn't about selling more cars, right? That's not the point of the company. It's about, or even trying to hang on to the car industry either, right? We're not necessarily trying to make it persist forever. The example I like to give is our push to become an aviation company. So we started an urban air mobility division. That division I'm jealous because they're hiring like crazy right now. And my division
somebody is, yeah,
slowed down in my part of the woods. But our urban air mobility division is hiring like crazy. They're really trying to get that part. Why? Because we think that air mobility is a means by which we can make it easier for people to travel around cities rather than on the ground. Not just on the ground, but also in the air too.
Great, thanks. I know there's other questions, so I'll step
there
back.
are.
I'll join you two later, Drew. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, David. And so, Josh, there's a question here in terms of we'll ask him if you'd like to ask the question on audio. So Greg Biggers, if you're out there, I'm going to ask your question, and I think Josh will try to figure out here if you'd like to ask the question via audio.
Yeah, let's see. Greg, you're able to chat now if you'd like to ask your question.
Hey, yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, I'm wondering in how this new reality and the kind of concomitant, change in the nature of work and innovation, how that is affecting who and how you're going to be hiring going forward.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I would look for, maybe not such a big change, but it's certainly, I don't know how to put it, but people who can work alone from home. I don't know how to put that, but there's a certain quality to it. I think it's this kind of a self-discipline, right? It's a kind of, you having the discipline to put yourself in a box, nobody's looking, and be productive. And I don't know how to put that succinctly, but that's what I would look for, or try to find out if can they do that, right?
And so please, if you have other questions, put them in the chat string. I'm monitoring those. And John, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about autonomous and self-driving. We had Raj Kapoor again, last week, who also heads the autonomous unit at Lyft. So I'm just, curious, I'm sitting here in our office in New York. I'm alone and looking out at the streets. And I think we were talking, and I was like, it'd be great if New York, it's going to take a while for the traffic to come back. If they just shut down one big north to south street avenue and just had this circle of like autonomous cars just constantly going, I guess, an autonomous form of a bus. But, do you think, by and large, the consumer population, they're going to be looking, will they be more open to this? And maybe there'll be less traffic on the road. Maybe they'll be more open to this. And do you have a sense, or are you already gearing up for more either R&D or looking at more companies in this space? But what's the state of autonomous there? And where do you think we'll be on the other side?
Let me just kind of mention that a few weeks ago, I think it was maybe end of March, we did finalize our joint venture with Aptiv. So we have a joint venture with Aptiv, which will be headquartered in Boston. And then we'll have other offices around the country as well as Korea. And that is intended to develop technology and products for automated vehicles, robotaxis, and so on. And so it's hard for me to say when we will see these products, but your question, I think, about will people be open to seeing automated, taxis or buses and so on? I would answer by saying I think people appreciate having less congestion, and certainly the pandemic and basically the shutdown. Working from home. Let me say, working from home shows us that we have a solution to congestion, right? Because there is none.
Right.
So we know what the solution can look like. It's very drastic, obviously, and not sustainable either. But I think people who do travel in streets recognize that there's no congestion, right? And so I hope what we realize is, hey, if we have dedicated lanes for certain types of vehicles, then that can help. And when you have to design around that, right? It's just that a dedicated lane, we need that, but we also need to have a whole system to provide the feeders and the ways by which pedestrians and other road users can access transportation.
Right.
Yes, I hope that this will cause people to say, you know what, I like not having congestion because congestion sucks, and so let's be motivated to figure out how we can do that.
Right. Now, I mean, I think we have this interesting opportunity in this reset, not just for my crazy example in New York, but I'm a Bay Area guy. I'm thinking those commutes on 680 and 580, and if you dedicate those lanes, and let's just start running some autonomous taxis and just see if people are drawn to it before all the traffic, comes back. Anyway, that's my little soapbox there. So Josh, why don't we go out to Kishore for a question?
I think actually that was the question, was regarding the autonomous. So, and John's plan for the future. John, I think, Raj did comment on, as we think about COVID-19 and cleanliness of taxis and cars, is your feeling that people will feel differently about getting in an autonomous vehicle or even a ride share being based on the cleanliness and the transmission of these types of viruses?
I think so, and I think people always have, in my opinion. But I think this pandemic has heightened that, very, very much so, and so I think not just for rideshare, but airplanes too, right? Where I think everybody who does this shared mobility, of course, airplanes are shared mobility too. Yeah, we're going to have to figure out some quality and standards and assurances that we did it as best we could to keep the interior clean. And not only that, but what are we doing to minimize bacterial or viral activity on the surfaces if they are there, right? To make it antibacterial or what have you, right? We're going to have to do that.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you remember, John, you were definitely at the Techonomy where the woman from Vital VO spoke, which was a UV overhead light, now announced at CES this year by being used by Delta in their bathrooms. So the visible light being able to kill certain bacteria, you can see those types of, innovations. I know there's a lot of innovation around surface and material science in combating that, but I could see that probably finding its way ultimately into your world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And cars and dealerships and where people work. Yeah, we're gonna have to do that kind of thing.
John, moving along a little bit to things like consumer mobility and entertainment and services, even sort of voice in the car. Where were things sort of trending, before we hit the crisis, and then, thinking as we move ahead, I'm sure you look at a lot of companies who are the startups that are playing in all these emerging tech spaces, but particularly on this sort of mobility and services and commerce in the car. What's that future look like? And will the crisis and the new consumer change that, or will that evolve?
I think the crisis itself, I don't think necessarily changes that. I think the number one thing that changes commerce in the car, including media, is automation, right? And so if we don't have to be responsible for the task of driving, then we can do other things, including shopping or consuming. So my feeling is that the revolution for those of us that drive was CarPlay and Android Auto, and that revolution is continuing, and that was a major delta, if you will. But other than that, no, I don't think it doesn't, unless you don't have to drive, then it doesn't change because it's too much distraction.
Right. And in terms of CarPlay and Android Auto, I mean, do you see that those are the de facto platforms and it's going to be those two? And look, you need that kind of consolidation to be able to build on them. And, we need to be going off the same standards.
Yeah. I think so.
In terms of just sort of thinking about, again, your organization and moving forward, how will the relationship, do you think, will change with the mothership? We touched a bit on it earlier, just in terms of do you think they'll look more to you units? Do you think you'll have less resistance, whether you have had resistance in the past at the engineering level or the product people or the executives? So maybe it's two-part. How might that evolve? And do you have any tips for people in terms of, sort of getting people on board at the mothership, or at least up the chain?
Yeah, it's I think this is generally speaking for any corporate. I think in this kind of situation, and I also think behavior corporate is an extension of individual behavior, is that we get into our comfort zone. We get what's comfortable. So I think if anything, I would say that it feels that there's less freedom, if you will, from headquarters, right? Because there's a pullback to shrinkage, there's a fear factor, and then instinctivently, I think all of us, we go back to our comfort zone, and we're not willing to extend out too much right now. So it's unfortunate. We're not. I won't say it's fortunate. It's just reality. It's just kind of this kind of thing. So, but anybody working in a remote office where you're headquartered elsewhere is to kind of just try to be. This is a great time to be creative, right? This is the kind of thing that innovation offices need to embrace, this opportunity to try to be, despite all of that, right, to work with it and try to show value, right? And that's really important. You have to fight the pity that might come. Oh, they're ignoring me or they're making it hard, right? Okay, I get that. You got to fight that. Right? You have to. Otherwise, I mean, that's part of the job, right?
Right. And how much of it is sort of, bottom up from you and think about the other people running your different Cradle offices and sort of saying, hey, we found this really interesting technology or company and like, you should take a look at it? Or how much of it is coming from down, like we want to solve this very specific problem, or we want this service in our infotainment package, or is it just kind of both?
It's definitely both, but I would emphasize, and I encourage my team to emphasize more the bottom up, right? Because then, and that's, otherwise you lose a chance to show real value. Because if you're just always taking orders, if you will, then I don't think that's good. Right? You have to fight that tendency and always go bottom. Emphasize more bottom up, at least like 60-40%.
Right. Josh was talking about surfaces and cleanliness and hygiene. That's going to be hugely important. There's a question here. It's like from Joyce Silver. Thank you, Joyce. Why not think about air filtration systems too? We'll need it on cars, mass transit, ships. What would you recommend? And I guess the related question there is, so, as even maybe on the corporate venture capital side, outside of partners and companies and technology, investing, like now that hygiene and cleanliness and all that's going to be important, will that become an area of focus for you in terms of, whether it's air filtration systems, clean interiors and all that?
What's interesting is in the US, we don't seem to emphasize air filtration as much, but when I go to Asia, they have those kind of as part of the product. I don't know if it's because we have better air quality here. I don't know. But so in terms of air filtering, that's been happening for not just for combustion, but the cabin air. We have that already. I guess in the US we'll maybe have more of that. So I would say all technologies to improve internal cabin quality, air, surfaces, antimicrobial, surfaces, UV, etc. We're all going to have to think about all of that, and it will become areas of innovation opportunity. It's true. I think this pandemic has highlighted the opportunities that may have been latent, but now will bubble up, hopefully, and we'll start investing in those companies too.
Right. And in terms of and if anybody else has questions, we're going to have time for about one or two more questions here. So put those in the chat string or the Q&A and I'll take a look. Just in terms of sourcing for you and, how, there's the venture capital side. So I'm curious about how you're sourcing startups that you end up investing in. How are you finding them? And then, I'd like to move also to, kind of developer relations and competitions and challenges and whether you do anything there. But first, how are you sourcing the startups that you meet where you're considering investment, and then, your criteria for investment as well would be helpful.
Right. So we've been finding them through, we have established relationships with other VCs in terms of being an LP in multiple funds across the world. So that's one source of we also have a network of our current portfolio companies, current co-investors. They've been aware of who we are, and so we've been getting that way, and then also attending these virtual events too, right? I think that's another source. And then they've been finding us as well, kind of inbound inquiry. Then what was the second part of your question, Drew?
Well, sort of, are you also, are you kind of at that developer level in what we used to call hackathons, which now people kind of call competitions and challenges? And do you put them on, or are you at least maybe attending some to kind of scout, or, where's that hackathon competition challenge thing sort of fit into your world?
Yeah, we have not quite the hackathon from a software viewpoint, but actually last year in Paris, we actually put out a call for, it was even before the pandemic, we're talking about how do we know the interior is clean. Right. And one of them is smell is an indicator. So we invested in a company called Aribel Technologies. I think they're in France. They have an artificial nose technology that can detect odor. And so if it stinks,
right.
then it says, maybe you want to check out the car, right? So we've been, of course, now looking into now how to clean that car if it's dirty and so on. So, so we do put out, the short answer, I guess, we do put out calls for areas of interest, whether it's hygiene tech, more lately. We have been doing that. Some of it's maybe open and some of it's maybe more confidential. But yeah, we do both combination of open call as well as confidential searches as well.
And briefly to go back to CVC, so you are both a direct investor, but you are also an LP in other funds. Is that?
That's right. And sometimes it's by sector, so energy or AI, or it could be by stage. We have an LP in a seed stage fund, one in Berlin and one here in the U.S. So yeah, depending upon stage, sector, we'll put money into an LP.
And do you use the LP role, I'm assuming, more to sort of scout and just see what's, stay on the pulse, or is it more of a financial metric or ROI for the LP role specifically?
It's dual. So yes, when we do direct investments, it's purely strategic. When we put money into an LP, VC, it's financially driven, with the, viewpoint that there's some strategic benefit there too from a deal flow viewpoint.
So seeing that I've been doing open innovation summits for the last 18 months, I should have asked this question, but Peter Mullen, hi Peter out there. Thanks for this question from Peter Mullen. How are contributions of open innovation like Cradle measured, ROI? So how does, in terms of who you report to, and I'm also curious, where does Cradle go up into the organization? Is it CEO, COO, CTO? Like, where do you go? And then how are you measured, in terms of whether you're doing a good job?
Right. So we report into the Chief Innovation Officer's divisions called Strategy and Technology Division. So, okay. And head of it is the Chief Innovation Officer. And we are measured by actually, a combination of factors. One is number of investments that we make, number of POCs that we've done, and then the number of internal, like, it literally count how many internal teams that we have made a match. It doesn't have to be big, but there's some kind of meaningful activity, usually involving budget, that's been going on. And so if we can make that connection, that's a win. And they seem like easy metrics because, in a sense, we had to negotiate that, because what happens is that to go to adoption to market, there's a whole chain of events that have to happen between that and then the market, right? And so we can't say, well, did you go to market? It's like, well, that's 99% of this out of our control.
Right. So it does come down to sort of some POCs, and I suppose it's the people that you're reporting to, just I guess in their gut thinking, okay, these are high quality POCs that are relevant, that might solve some business problems, as opposed to sort of, innovation theater, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I really appreciate the management of the company. They understand it's like, it's a long road. But if you're making the effort and you get somebody to agree with you to work with this company, they know that's big. So
right.
It's a new thing, right? It's like, what is this little small company, right? And then there's a lot of, anxiety initially from that, from an unknown viewpoint. But they really appreciate it. They really get it and really appreciate that.
Yeah. So as we kind of wrap up, I guess one of my questions here is, and it can be any part of Cradle or what you're doing and what you're focusing on. You have a lot of time to think now as well in this sort of pause. So what is it that you're really focused on that you want to do either differently or add to the scope of Cradle and what it does, or, relationships with the mothership? Sort of, it can be anything, but what, you'll have an opportunity. We all have a bit of a reset opportunity. So what are you really focused on in terms of what's next?
Actually, it was similar to the previous speaker, Mark. I think he mentioned that it's going to be a while before we resume to the normal work environment in the office or the lab. And so what I hope we can do is create an environment. I think he said it really well, where depending upon the person or the stage of project or the activity, if working from home is effective, then go ahead. And I would imagine, like him, there's obviously you have to do stuff in the lab or whatever. You have to come together and work on stuff, right?
Right.
And hope that what happens is that we are giving our team members the ability to work from home, plus the ability to now work with a distributed team, right? Right. Maybe the developer is in Boston, and then my test engineer is in Southern California, and I'm here in Northern California, and I have another team member in Korea, right? And so really working in a distributed way, which I think would end up making the whole organization more resilient.
Right.
Anyway, so I hope we can find it work in a distributed way, and work from home becomes acceptable.
Yeah, and related to that, I'm curious about, maybe, I know Singapore is new and is coming, but are any other, cities, countries that you were thinking about, or that you think on the other side of this, that you might want to open a Cradle office? And, where are those pockets of innovation where you could go next, or where will you go next? If you want to answer that.
Some of it's driven by the partners that we work with. So in Singapore, it was the Economic Development Board that we worked with to do that. But it's also where our markets are. And so where we have market presence and we want to maintain that, then we'll tend to put a Cradle office there too. It's not always just about the location of startups, because some innovations are about the market and the customer. Right. Charlene would say that too, especially I read her book, right? It's like, who are your future customers, right? And then make them and innovate around that, right? I wholeheartedly.
And is there the academic side too? Maybe, centers where there are also, engineers or, just, great academic institutions. Does that factor in as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
That's great. Hey, John, thanks so much. We're gonna bring David in to wrap us up, but hang in there. And I hope to see you at one of our shows in person really soon.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Drew.